Good evening, and thank you very much for the opportunity to allow us to present our paper titled The Regulation of Polygyny in South Africa in the Context of the Proposed Single Marriage Bill. And the question that we ask is whether it is a victory for the equal treatment of women or not. This is a paper that was drafted by myself, as well as Professor Matadi and Mr. Ngema. So just to create a little bit of a background to the research that we conducted, polygamy is a cultural practice pertaining to a man that is simultaneously and lawfully wedded to more than one spouse. In such a union, the man is regarded as a polygamist. Polyandry, however, refers to a woman that is concurrently and lawfully wedded to many husbands. On the face of it, it appears that the advent of colonialism in Africa and the institution of polygyny was strongly condemned by both colonialists as well as missionaries. Such prejudice can act as an obstacle against social harmony and multiplicity of cultures in one society. This paper intends to discuss the proposed single marriage bill and consider whether its regulation of polygamy is in line with the constitutional value of equality and whether it is a victory for the rights of women to equality. This paper therefore aims to explore the potential for leading polyandry, acknowledging that lawmakers are not yet prepared to abolish polygamy. So to start off with the outline of the presentation, we'll start with the background and introduction to the research problem, the methodology and the theoretical framework, as well as the literature review, which will touch on the South African framework, as well as the impact of the single marriage bill on polygyny, the practice of polygyny itself, the rationale for the practice of this tradition, as well as international perspectives thereon, before we reach a critical analysis and a conclusion and some recommendations. So to start off with the historical background, the proposed single marriage bill sets out to resolve the fact that marriages in South Africa are regulated by different pieces of legislation. However, as in the case of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, the proposed single marriage bill perpetuates patriarchal norms by making it clear that only a man is permitted to have more than one wife, while denying such a right to their female counterparts. Accordingly, on the face of it, it proposes that the single marriage bill reflects a clear discrimination against women. If the law is to treat spouses equally, women should be allowed to have more than one husband if they desire such. South African law must consider polyandry within its legal framework. Introducing polyandry will undoubtedly raise a thorny issue of morality, but seeing as the government has already legislated one of the most contentious issues, such as permitting LGBTQ communities to flourish within the country by giving them legal recognition. For South Africa to remain committed to equality and justice, it must address these gender disparities in marriage legislation, thereby ensuring that all individuals, regardless of gender, have equal rights and opportunities within the institution of marriage. The research problem that the paper tends to address is whether the explicit recognition of polygamous marriages in terms of Section 6 of the Single Marriage Bill raises significant concerns regarding gender equality and the perpetuation of gender-based discrimination with the South African marriage law. Despite the bill's intent to unify and modernize marriage laws, its provision for polygyny, allowing men, but not women, as I've indicated, to have multiple spouses, may inherently reinforce patriarchal norms and unequal power dynamics between genders. This issue is particularly critical in the context of South Africa's constitutional commitment to non-discrimination and gender equality, as outlined in Sections 9, subsection 1, and subsection 3 of our Constitution. The research question, therefore, is, does the explicit recognition of polygyny marriages in terms of Section 6 of the Single Marriage Bill, which permits only men to have multiple spouses, perpetuate gender-based discrimination? And if so, is there a need for greater gender equality in South Africa's marriage laws? The focus of the paper is therefore on equality and questions within the context of modern legal and ethical standards, considering implications for gender equality. The theory that we've employed is that of a gender feminist theory, which basically examines how social structures, including legal systems, perpetuate gender inequality. It seeks to understand and challenge the patriarchal norms that marginalize women and limit their rights. The methodology that was adopted in terms of this presentation, in terms of the paper, And this presentation was basically underpinned by qualitative research through documentary analysis, by systematically examining and interpreting primary as well as secondary sources, and to gain insight and understanding of social phenomena, common patterns and themes are identified through thematic analysis and conceptual understanding. So as indicated, the current legislative framework in South Africa is currently governed by three different pieces of legislation. The first is the Marriage Act, which basically governs monogamous heterosexual relationships. The Civil Union Act, which basically allows for heterosexual as well as homosexual monogamous relationships. And then lastly, the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, which recognizes heterosexual polygamous marriages. This is a marriage that basically takes place in terms and in accordance with customary practices, thereby reflecting South Africa's cultural diversity. Each of these acts therefore serve to regulate different types of unions, reflecting the country's commitment to recognizing diverse forms of marriages. The legislation is therefore designed to promote equality, prevent discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, or cultural practices. The Single Marriage Bill, on the other hand's objective is therefore to unify and to modernize South Africa's marriage laws by merging existing legislation into a single comprehensive framework. The core principle is therefore to recognize all intimate partnerships, thereby ensuring that all forms of marriages and partnerships, regardless of their nature, are legally recognized and validated. The bill therefore aims to align marriage laws with the principles of equality, dignity, and non-discrimination as enshrined in terms of the South African Constitution. That being said, one needs to take cognizance of the fact that for some of the reasons behind the practice of polygamy in African customary law. And although traditionally there are numerous reasons, such as political, economical, social, or religious reasons, we have identified the main aspects that underpins the use and the practice of polygamy in terms of the African culture. The first being that of childlessness. The incapability of procreating offspring is one of the reasons that increases the desire to have more than one woman or wife for the sake of procreating rights from biblical times. The inability to have a child carries significant consequences, such as the risk of your property being inherited by a non-family member upon your death, and the absence of a successor to continue your bloodline. Procreation of offspring is also of great significance amongst African people. Childlessness is therefore not merely seen as an unfavorable incident, but is considered as a calamity. A child, more especially a male child, is also preferred over a female child in African society. One of the things that show the importance of a male child is the practice of a levirate union, also known as ukungena in Zulu or kenela in Sotho. In addition to addressing the issue of childlessness, the levirate union was a compassionate African practice that ensured that widows and her children were cared for by one of her late brothers or husband's surviving brothers without compelling her participation. Likewise, the practice of Nqobizwe, a custom where the marrying of a seed raiser affirmed the significance of producing a desired male heir. Nqobizwe, the custom is usually practiced when a deceased has left property but had no male heir to continue his name and thereby saving it from extinction. His natural heir normally takes the deceased brother's cattle and marries a wife for his dead brother. In addition to the aforesaid, polygamy is also unquestionably seen as a compassionate solution for a wife who is unable to bear children. In terms of African culture as well as belief, Africans is known as life that can only start and only continue on earth when the old give way to the birth of the young, and that the tree that does not bear fruit brings an end to his own. So from that perception, and due to the constant desire of some people wanting to have children and to ensure their bloodline, polygamy was basically, or the childlessness was used as a rationale for the use of polygamy in terms of African cultures. The second aspect that underpins the use of polygamy in African cultures is that of labor force. In traditional Africa, it was not always feasible to hire people to labor for you because traditional society was not functioning in a caste-based economy. Likewise, African communities place great emphasis on self-reliance. This does not necessarily mean that people did not resort to employing others at this stage. Therefore, the backbone of the traditional economy was based on reliance on the resources they produced for themselves and save it for their survival. If the mode, in other words, of reproducing required greater workforce, they had no substitute other than to increase their family or polygamous relationships. In addition to the workforce, another aspect that can be regarded as a rationale for the use of polygamy is warfare. In the older times, for men, the delayed marriage was usually associated with the duties of a warrior. This is because traditionally a regiment that was still alive and active in wars was not allowed to get married until the men reached a specific age. And for that reason, often men took more than one wife once they finished their militant duties. The last aspect that we thought was important to address was incompatibility, especially sexual incompatibility, where people do not share the same libido. And from this perspective, polygamy serves as a solution also, in some instances, to couples that has to make use of alternatives to keep their libido, as well as the cultural practices of female sexual appropriation. Polygamy under international human rights. One aspect that we need to take note of in terms of the article is also the international perspective as far as polygamous rights are concerned. Although it permits men to have more than one wife, while women are not accorded the same right, on the face of it, it is a blatant discrimination against women, and therefore is not surprising that the Convention of Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, perceives polygamy as constituting discrimination against women. The violation in terms of the constitutional right of women and breaches the provision of Article 5, subsection A of the Convention, as per the recommendation 21 of 1994. It's also noticeable that most of the international human rights instruments mandates member states to eradicate practices that may result in discrimination. It is beyond any doubt that polygamy is a clear form of discrimination against women because it only permits a man to marry more than one spouse while denying the same right to women. At the same time, Article 16 of the Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which provides that men and women are full age without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion, have a right to marry and found a family, are entitled to equal rights as to marriage during marriage and its dissolution. Articles 23, subsection 4 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and Article 6 of the African Women's Protocol provides for equality in relation to marriage. That being said, looking at the South African legislative framework in terms of polygamy, it is noticeable that Section 7, subsection 6 of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act makes specific provision that a husband in a customary marriage who wishes to enter into a further customary marriage with another woman after the commencement of the Act must take an application to court to approve a written contract which will regulate the future matrimonial property system of that marriage. On the face of it, in other words, CEDAW has already argued that polygamy is respective in nature, encroaches upon the equality rights of women, and is unacceptable. Therefore, the application of the principle of non-discrimination could require either the abolition of male rights to have more than one wife, alternatively, for women to have the right to more than one man. The international human rights position is that polygamy violates the right of equality in the context of marriage and must therefore be outlawed or prohibited. In terms of the critical analysis, Sections 9, 10, and 31 of the Constitution of South Africa are pivotal in enabling the realization of polygamy within the framework of constitutional rights, particularly those of equality, non-discrimination, and human dignity, which are integral to the institution of marriage and are to be exercised within the context of cultural and religious practices. The Draft Marriage Bill of 2022 exemplifies the legislature's commitment to modernizing its marriage laws to inclusivity, acknowledge diverse forms of intimate partnership, irrespective of individuals' gender, sexual orientation, or religion and cultural affiliations. Chapter 3 of the Single Marriage Bill specifically addresses this requirement for polygamous marriages, while Section 3, subsection D and E, respectively, provide for the recognition of polygamous marriages entered into both before and after the enactment of the bill. However, the bill notably excludes recognition of polyandry, which reflects a patriarchal basis that perpetuates gender discrimination without a justifiable basis. This omission is in the Single Marriages Bill. This underscores ongoing debates about gender equality within the legal framework governing marital relationships. The proposed Single Marriage Bill, in conclusion, in South Africa, therefore represents a critical opportunity to re-evaluate the legal landscape of marital practices, particularly in addressing gender disparity perpetuated by polygyny. While historically rooted and culturally significant, polygyny has faced increasing scrutiny under contemporary human rights framework, which emphasizes equality and non-discrimination. The bill, however, falls short of true gender equality by maintaining a one-sided approach to multiple marriages, favoring polygyny over polyandry. To truly uphold constitutional values of equality and justice, South African lawmakers should consider legalizing polyandry alongside polyandry, ensuring that all individuals, regardless of gender, have equal rights and opportunities within the institution of marriage. This step would not only promote social harmony and cultural inclusivity, but also align with global movements towards gender equality and diversity and diverse marital practices. We thank you.